Hey, everybody. I'm coming up on 400 episodes, which is a lot. And I hope you will come celebrate with me. I'm doing a special live program at the Dynasty Typewriter Theater to celebrate 400 episodes. Let me tell you this. When I did 300, I did a live show. And to this day, I still feel guilty that it was like 16 white guys and 2 women and 1 person of color. And that's not great. And this was a couple of years ago. So I'm trying to correct that with number 400, or at least apologize for it. But as it happens, I have the most amazing lineup of writers, including, but not limited to, Monica Breen, who's doing the Buffy remake, reboot. It's a remake. It's an extension of the brand. She put out a great tweet about it, which you should go look for. Alexandra Cunningham, who's doing the Dirty John TV show based on the hit podcast. Carly Rae, who worked on Westworld and Mindhunter, which is a great show, and she also was doing one of these Game of Thrones spin-off for HBO, which who knows if that is happening. Who else? Angela Kang, who's the showrunner for The Walking Dead. Jenny Hutchison, who has been on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and she's doing the Welcome to Night Vale series. If you listen to the episode with Chernold Edwards and Christine Boylan, both of them are going to be back because that was such a great conversation. I wanted to talk more with them. This is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be at the Dynasty Typewriter Theater on Sunday, the 26th of August. We're doing a double feature. We're doing my 400th episode at 6 p.m. And then at 8 p.m., my friend Matt Gorley is doing a live I Was There Too, featuring some of the murder victims in Friday the 13th. As well as Paul Rust, who is a big Friday the 13th fan. So that is on the 26th of August, Dynasty Typewriter Theater. Go to dynastytypewriter.com or follow me on Twitter at Ben Blacker for details.
Forever, dog.
Before today's podcast, we have a conversation with Claudia Black. Claudia is a terrific actress who you may know as Dahlia, the powerful witch in the originals. She was a villain in this show. Although, are there really villains? This is something we talk about. Claudia has some really great insights into playing a witch, playing a character who is usually seen as evil. And I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Hello, I'm talking to Claudia Black. Claudia, thank you for speaking with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, and hello to everyone listening.
Claudia, I wanted to speak with you because you played the witch Dahlia on the originals. Tell me, if you would, a little bit about taking that role and what you knew about the character going in, if you can recall.
Well, I mean, she's kind of like Harry Lime in The Third Man, which is a very old film reference that is talked about film studies because of the structure of the movie and the character. Contextually, Harry Lime is so discussed but doesn't appear, I think, until the third act of the film, but because he's been so built up, he has this incredible power. And that's exactly what happened for me, stepping in to play Dahlia. She'd been oft spoken about and referenced, but never seen on the show as an adult. And I don't know if I really understood what a big deal that was. In the audition scene, she was sort of more sexy and more playful and certainly manipulative, very strong. She ended up being actually quite different.
Mm-hmm. How did she wind up being, especially after playing a few episodes? I imagine once your personality gets in there, she starts to change.
Not really. I've seen that happen on other shows. I mean, the guys on the show behind, who were writing it and producing it might say otherwise. Mm-hmm. It just felt to me that they were on. It was taking on a very serious tone towards the end of that season, and I think that's what they needed to honor. I think that's probably, having not spoken to them about it specifically, it's a good question to ask Julie when I see her. Yeah. But for me, it's about sort of showing up and doing the job that's actually being asked of me, because I feel like I'm sort of one color on a big canvas whenever I take a job. And the heartbreaking story with Freya and Dahlia and her backstory and Dahlia's real relationship with her sister was really touching to me, and I guess that's why, in a way, what was required of Dahlia, it seemed to go in that direction. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think I mentioned to a producer early on that Dahlia seemed to be different than the character that I'd auditioned for.
Mm-hmm.
There just didn't seem to be as much room for Dahlia herself to, in a way, I don't know, take as much delight in what she was doing as she could have. But talking about it now, thinking about it, now knowing where the season was heading, it makes sense to me why there was that schism.
Sure. You mentioned the very sympathetic story about Dahlia and her sister, and the question I'm always curious about from people who play villains is whether they see their character as a villain.
Oh, I mean, you can't. I think that the minute you pigeonhole a character, you're sort of forcing them, you're limiting them. And I think it's bad parenting, and I think that's what acting is. When you are given stewardship of a role, you're birthing it along with other people. And, it's a gorgeous, humbling moment when I meet with a costume designer and talk to them about it and really understand what that moment is like for them. It's a big moment for a costume designer. It's a big moment for a casting director. It's a big moment for a costume designer when that character comes off the page alive in front of them. Mm-hmm. And they know in their bodies that the character has arrived. And so talking to a costume designer, Nancy Cheo, the fabulous Nancy Cheo from the originals, that was one of the juiciest moments of her job, was seeing the character come off the page by way of the clothing draping on that person's form, and starting to understand visually how they could continue to bring that more to life. And so for actors, by whatever means they choose, it's their job to never be in judgment of that character.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how do you... Sorry, go ahead.
They talk about it in all the good acting schools. Just wherever there's a resistance in the actor to play the character a certain way, or to say the lines that they've been given, any of those resistances are worth looking at for personal study and exploration, because there's judgment there, most likely, and we can't really... In a way, we almost don't deserve that stewardship if we're going to stand in judgment of our character. And the more we study and understand human behavior, the better I think we become as actors, because it helps us to have compassion for what's underneath the actions that these characters take.
Absolutely. Do you recall what that resistance was for you for the character of Dahlia?
I don't think there was any resistance for me. I think that I don't think I've ever had a problem playing with the shadow aspects of humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's probably efficacy in it for me, because I'm a good person in my real life. I identify as a good person. Though I wouldn't normally use that term, in the sense that, there's a lot of goodness in me and I'm well-intended. I wouldn't say that there are good children and bad children. I think, having become a mother myself, it's really easy to see that often a child's actions, when they're pre-verbal, are misunderstood, and then they can get put on this very negative track for the rest of their lives if someone isn't there to observe them, love them as unconditionally as possible, because I think that's an almost superhuman thing, to be able to love unconditionally, but worth striving for. I think that, it's the same with our acting. We have to, parent these characters and love them into being with the good and with the light and the dark that's within them. And that's what was so great about Dahlia's character. She had this beautiful backstory that made me weep when I saw the other actors playing the roles. I was so touched by what they did in their relationship. It was heartbreaking to witness.
Yeah, and all of that said, she is such a sympathetic character. She does have this really moving backstory. She's still framed as the villain in this season. I think fans are always curious to know about the dynamic among actors off screen or, while shooting where, there are shades, of goodness and villainy on this show. And how did everybody get along? Did you pick up your roles off screen as well?
Oh, God, no. I mean, I had an absolute blast with everyone, and I think it's a testament to Julie and the shows that she's run and been involved with, that she understands the power of an ensemble, and cultures get created because of the type of society we live in. They get created from the top down. And especially once I then moved on to containment, it was extremely evident how important it was to Julie and David, our director, that we get to know each other as soon as possible. I think there are some pitfalls when the cast is younger. I worked on shows in my early 20s where we just didn't know how to set healthy boundaries, and we would end up living in houses together and working together, and there was never any separation. But I think Julie absolutely trusted us, certainly with containment, to just, to get to know each other, get the ball rolling, because I think that especially a television set film, you have more time, but with television, you live and die by your shorthand. And so that means that the communication that you have with everyone on the set, the crew, the cast, everyone, the more ease there is in the communication, the easier it is to film. And I think that translates onto the screen as well. Having worked a lot in motion capture video games now, the companies that prioritize the chemistry between the actors have always won. Always. They always, get the greatest reviews for performances, and there's a reason for that.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I adored everyone, and they were, from what I could tell, very different to their characters. And I think that's something, a function of actors in this culture. I know we sort of say, well, it's not rocket science, but if we're able to actually play out the shadow aspects of humanity, even through the veil of supernatural people who aren't actually human, it makes it easier for us to look at ourselves. And I think politically right now, there's nothing more important than that exploration of how we got to where we are and what our individual role is in that, how we can have self-responsibility and accountability at the microcosmic level, and then looking at the macrocosmic, what are we going to do as a divided nation, let's say in the States, and it's happening around the world now as well, simultaneously. What is our part as individuals and as community members to evolve?
I think that's an incredibly important point. Just a couple more questions for you. For this character of Delia, where do you think her power came from, and where did you find her power?
It's a really interesting question because of what I'm exploring in myself personally. I joke that I was sort of paid for my anger for about 20 years. It's not pretty or cool or an attractive trait normally in women to be angry. And so most women internalize their anger, and it becomes depression, or it becomes illness. Not the depression and physical illness are mutually exclusive. Or we were forced, depending on what era we were raised in and started in the workforce in, we would become way more masculine at the expense of the feminine. And I think in order to be a real witch, having friends who have trained with green witches, they're herbalists, they're midwives, they are people who identify as witches in the most positive possible way, because the word connotes such negativity. It's about embracing the divine feminine and being able to be in balance with masculine energy so that you can be productive, but without really embracing and harnessing one's own divine feminine. I don't think you can be a good witch in reality or in these shows. And I think the bad witches, as they're labeled, or the villains, have just gone out of alignment. Without healthy feminine mentorship, without the divine feminine playing a big role in their lives, they're going to go over to a darker, more destructive side. And as I've been taught philosophically, masculine energy is the department of getting stuff done. It's productive. It's actually, in Eastern philosophy, it's the light source, it's the heat, it's the warmth, and it's the feminine energy that is the cool, dark mystery. And I think that's where real power comes from, is surrendering to knowing that there is something way bigger than us in the universe, And I think that's where witches really do draw their power from, is believing in something far greater than themselves. And in the positive female, witch lineages, women were praying for the healing of the earth for centuries, millennia even. And it wasn't until the Dark Ages, when the church were frightened of that power and misunderstood it, that Friday the 13th was considered, was deemed to be a superstitious and unholy day, because people became frightened of the divine feminine. And I think, when we look at what's really happening in our consciousness now, as we try to evolve, I think men need to be given, give themselves permission to reclaim their own divine feminine, so that they can be in balance and not blow up the bloody world.
I think that's wonderfully put. Claudia Black, do you have a favorite pop culture witch?
A favorite what?
Pop culture witch?
Oh, I did love Bewitched, I have to say. I think I was probably watching reruns as a kid by the time it came out in Australia. And was it her sister, her naughty sister?
Yes, also played by Elizabeth Montgomery. In a black wig.
Just kidding. Yeah, I mean, and oh my God, and even just not necessarily a witch, but Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie.
Sure.
I mean, these were coming through, I guess, from the 60s, that by the time they came to Australia in the late 70s or 80s, that was sort of the diet of television that we were receiving in Australia. We would get sort of 50% English, maybe, if you watched the BBC, and 50%, if not more, American content. And when you think about the sort of the patriarchal storytelling, there's this woman trapped in a bottle, and her master's wish is her command, and just the way feminine was depicted in all of this story. And that's why partly I'm so grateful to have come through in an era where women were allowed to be angry and ugly, and ugly in their emotions, or unconventionally attractive, or more masculine in their appearance, as I certainly am. I'm not Miss White Picket Fence. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily witches that it was sort of warriors and soldiers that I first think I identified as a teenager. Mm-hmm. Having grown up as a young girl watching these sort of these shows, the Muppets had a big impact on me archetypally. I thought that was just pure genius. That was amazing to work with the Henderson company down the line. Yeah. But it was when I saw those strong. I saw Sigourney Weaver in Alien, and I saw Linda Hamilton in Terminator, and I just was like, oh, I can do that. Yeah. I know how to do that. And it was part of that new sort of the shift where women were allowed to claim their anger, and we have a lot to be angry about. And I don't know, by the way, my goodness, I've just seen twice Hannah Gadsby's special on Netflix, Nanette. It's incredible. It's an historic piece of storytelling. And my kids and I, at one point we were watching Once Upon a Time, and really enjoying watching all those fairy tales unfold, and seeing them, sort of everything being given a reboot. And it's such an interesting, my younger son came to me a few years ago and said, "Mama, is Batman for kids or for adults?" And I said, "What do you mean? He's a superhero for kids or adults?" And I said, "What an incredible question. Why do you ask that?" And he said, "Well, every time I ask you if I can watch this new movie, you say, no, it's not appropriate for kids. But it's a superhero, like it would be Batman in The Dark Knight Returns and things like that." I would say, wow, I guess because we grew up with them and they were ours, kind of like the baby boomers, we're just not ready to let go of them yet. So they've grown up and gone dark as we have. And we're exploring the more dark aspects of them in a more realistic setting, rather than sort of having the pop, wow, bang, and the sound effects and the underwear on the outside. We've sort of grown that model of superhero. And I think we're doing that too with witches. And it's great to see them shifting into more multi-dimensional, as you say, sympathetic characters. Because villainy isn't born in a vacuum. But it is very interesting with science fiction and fantasy storytelling how valuable it is for Western culture to be, or for cultures in general, to be able to view aspects of humanity, but from an alien or outside perspective, because otherwise it becomes very didactic and very shaming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of, I think it's an easier pill to swallow when we endow other creatures with the villainy.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've been an important part of the ongoing conversation in maturing these sort of character tropes. Please tell people where they can find you online and what's coming up for you next.
I'm a funny participant when it comes to social media. I've actually grown to. I like the community that can evolve on Twitter. So I guess it's at Claudia Black or the. What am I on Twitter? Good Lord.
We'll find it and link to it.
Okay, and I'm the Claudia Black at Instagram because there's already another Claudia Black. How dare she out there? And I love interacting with people if they can be respectful. I love if they teach me and have a different opinion to me about things. I actually invite that discussion. I'm online to learn. I believe sort of someone did help me and set up a Facebook page for me, and I haven't been interacting there directly. But you're more likely to find me on Instagram through imagery and story, and Twitter through politics mostly.
Thank you so much for chatting, Claudia. I appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure, and I just want to say, vis-a-vis the politics, I just keep getting really frustrated that 45 keeps referring to himself as a witch.
Yeah, a witch. This is a witch hunt.
Yeah, this ain't a witch hunt, baby.
No.
This ain't a witch hunt.
You got that right.
The rest of us who've actually been witches in past lives know what a real witch hunt is. It's been amazing, really, to hear women who identify as, members of the Wiccan community saying, I am a witch and I practice, it's a positive practice. And there are a lot of people around the world sort of praying for us to evolve before we, come to some unfortunate eventuality. So were it not for witches, I think we might not even be having this conversation. So I credit where credit is due to the real witches of the world right now.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Now is the time for you to call up your local comic book shop and pre-order The Only Thing I Care About, my new Vertigo comic called Hexwives. It's about witches, and it's about gender politics. Does that sound fun? Probably not, but it is. The artist is amazing. The colorist is amazing. The editors are unbelievable. I'm just hanging on for dear life and hoping that people buy this so I can tell dozens and dozens of stories in this world. So please call up your local comic book shop. If you don't know where it is, go to comicshoplocator.com, put in your zip code, and order that comic Hexwives. It comes out on Halloween. You just tell them you want it. They'll hold a copy for you, and then you go to the store and buy it. It's easy. It's like $4. And I think you're going to like it. I do.
They write, they talk, and talk about what they write. Tune in tonight, or whenever the time is right. It's the Writers Panel with Ben Blacker, and it's starting now. Oh, yeah!
This is it. This is how a podcast starts. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves on the microphones and tell us a few places where the listener may have seen your name on TV. And Raamla, let's start with you.
Okay. My name is Raamla Mohamed. I was recently on Scandal as a writer, producer. Yeah, for the whole time.
Were you there the whole
the whole time. I was a researcher season 1, and then season 2 became a writer and went through the whole time. I also worked on a show called Still Star-Crossed that was briefly on ABC. And as an assistant, I worked on Off the Map, Grey's Anatomy. So I kind of came up through the Shondaland campus.
Yeah. I'm really curious to hear about that. We've had a few Shondaland writers, but we've never really dug in on what do you learn there? It must be everything.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah.
What did you talk about?
I'm Holly Henderson. Most recently working on a show called Hit the Floor. Before that, was on a lot of CW shows. Came up on Smallville, and then to Secret Circle and Beauty and the Beast, and Hit the Floor we went away for a minute, and I was over on a show called Stitchers at Freeform, and then now Hit the Floor's come back, And that's where I am now.
There's going to be a lot of hit the floor talk today because James is also here.
Oh, hello. James LaRosa, creator of Hit the Floor. And basically for the last half decade, it's been hit the floor all day, day. And before that, I mean, basically lots of pilots, sort of some schlock TV movies, more pilots before that, some good TV movies. But I have I think a sort of a strange background every time anyone's around me and they talk about all their credits, all the different shows. I didn't really go through the writer's room so much. I was a staff writer on a show called DC back in, I think, the 1800s. It was a mid-season.
I remember that show.
There's lots of behind-the-scenes reasons to remember that show. Maybe not on screen, but definitely on screen. And then I just kind of pilot, and wound up running a show.
Which this comes up every once in a while, and that's sort of been my experience too, is, you know, you can make sort of a decent living for a while selling a pilot or two every year, and kind of you inch closer to hopefully having them made. So let's talk about breaking in. Let's do that with all of you. James, tell me about that strange way of breaking in, because when you are living that way, it's sort of in fits and starts.
Yeah, and so I have a friend, actually my former boss, Margaret Oberman, who teaches sometimes this sort of UCLA extension class about with kids 20-somethings, 30-somethings, kids, I'm now ancient, about breaking in. And she has really all these famous friends who, you know, she was a Saturday Night Live writer. She wrote for Eddie Murphy. And she would have all these really famous people with them and would be like, oh yeah, so, you know, I just remember when when my friend Dan Aykroyd asked me if I want to swing by, and I just don't have that story.
Right.
But my story is the struggle. I mean, how far back do I go? Yes.
I'm curious to see where you want to start.
I mean, I'll start in, I'll say this. When I graduated from Syracuse University, as some fabulous people can.
Must be nice.
3 years
Shout
counts. And I moved out to LA and didn't know anybody out here. And so for a couple of years, I was actually Margaret Oberman's writer's assistant. And for those 2 years, I was at my own office with a laser printer, which was very exciting for me because it was inkjet back in my apartment. And I would
let me interrupt you for a second. I apologize. I'm going to interrupt.
Really, this is the juiciest part of my entire my inkjet printer.
I mean,
well, I want to dig in on something. So, what was she working on at the time? What were you being exposed to?
It was at Big Ticket Television, which I think only exists as a Judge Judy. Judge Judy was one of our shows. Yeah. And she had a development deal there for half hour. And she was always in development and never in production at that time for those 2 years. So really, I just did not do a lot, to be honest. So I had all the time in the world to work on my stuff, really. And it was fun because I got to work for Mr. Spelling. It was like a satellite company of and I just grew up on all the spelling shows, so that I just sort of so I got to go to like the spelling Christmas balls, which were amazing. And you meet like the whole cast of 90210 and Melrose Place, and they're all like 4 feet tall, and you're like, this is so crazy. But yes, so well, I mean, when you're like hanging out with like Kelly and Donna.
You're saying things that
and Billy and Allison and
like
yes,
blow my mind.
It was pretty great. But yeah, I wish I could say that it was this sort of life-altering experience where I learned the ins and outs of the business. But really, I learned that you could come into an office that a lot of money gets paid. We had a lot of writers who had deals there. And as I said, Judge Judy was the show that we basically
keeping the lights on.
Right, that was keeping the lights on. I think they had Moesha. Exactly. But anyway, it was.
So that's interesting. So you weren't getting the hands-on experience, but you did have time to write. So you were sort of writing new stuff for yourself.
Yeah, and I had friends that were out. Like they'd leave by 7, they'd be out having the big Hollywood life, and I would stay in my office until 10 p.m. and work on my spec script. So I had like an NYPD Blue. I'm really dating. This is going to be like a time capsule.
We should. I mean, I think we all sort of came up during that era when you wrote a spec of an existing show to get staffed on.
Yeah. Now
show.
I won't even read them. If
Right,
someone
no.
tries
Spec
when,
after
as
spec
I,
after spec after
If
spec.
there's
Yeah.
one mission to this podcast, it's to bring back specs, because I think there really
I
is
think
no
I
better
agree.
indicator of what the job is.
Yeah,
exactly.
I agree.
but spec of existing show spec script. Oh God, no, I totally disagree. This
You
is going to be our
wouldn't
first
really?
fight.
This might be.
As I think we all know, in the process of how much your writing is really in an episode. I actually learn more about a writer by their original material than I do by their version of someone else's show. That's just personal. I want to see what words they use. I want to see what characters they create. I want to see what their instincts are. I loved my episode of NYPD Blue, my spec, and it got me my agent and all that stuff.
great.
But nowadays, I just feel like if I'm reading, a scandal, for instance, I mean, I'm going, wow, Shonda really was behind such a great show. I'm not thinking,
I see.
Sally No Name knocked that one out of the park.
But isn't the job, like, you're hiring these people to emulate your voice on your show?
Yes.
So what's the indicator of
This
that?
really is
Or
our
do you
first fight, isn't it?
It is. No, I sincerely think there's value in
Here's
both.
here's the safety that I have learned in my job is that it is not the end of the game if a writer turns in a script to me that is not completely in my voice, because I've had it happen. I mean, the showrunner does take that script and then puts it in their own voice. And sometimes it's easier than other times. Sometimes it's brutal and you're like, okay, it's a page one. But in general, I know I can do that. And so
That's not the hardest part of your
it's
job
not the
anyway.
hardest. Yes, that's true. But I know that I can create certain types of stories, and if someone can come along and create a different type of story that isn't necessarily my forte, like when Holly and Dawn came along, the sample that I read was like sci-fi basically, and that wasn't my experience, and certainly that's not Hit the Floor. There's no aliens on Hit the Floor, but I was inspired by what they were doing, and also the voice to me was really interesting. And I knew it was theirs as opposed to, Shonda's, or as opposed to,
Stephen
anyone
Bochco's.
else's. Right.
That's interesting. So you were able to write these specs. You got them into the hands of an agent.
It was a long process. And so for 2 years, I would send these query letters out to agents, which I think they still do. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's very hard to get representation these days, from what I understand from doing these classes with Margaret. But at the time, I would send, I would research the shows that I love, the writers that were on them, and send the agent scripts and say, I'm a big fan of your client. I would be a cheaper version of that client. Would you like to read my script? And then I have still to this day a folder full of those letters that I photocopied, and then I would write on them what the assistant would say each time I called. They just, call back in a couple of weeks. Oh, they've been really busy this weekend. Promise this weekend. Oh, it was a award show, whatever. And so for 2 years, and I didn't stop. I'm like, do you ever see Better Off Dead? I think that, or One Crazy Summer, which is the one with the kid on the bicycle. It's like, I want my $2.
Better Off Dead, yeah.
That's the one. To get my agent, I was that kid. So if I sent you a query letter, you're fucked. Like, you are, in my line of sight. You're not getting away. And if you say, I'm going to read it or call back or whatever, you will read it and I will call back.
They may be giving you the Hollywood no, but you're hearing call back.
Exactly. The Hollywood no. And so, and there are agents who work today who are huge, and I still have that letter. And then of course they're calling me going, oh, I have a client who'd be great on your show. And of course they don't remember that they've just rejected me for 2 years straight. But ultimately, the way that I got my first assistant, my first agent, was because an assistant became an agent who I kind of buddied up to. And so,
which is not an uncommon story. We often hear about that, is the assistant who is going to be young and hungry and want to find a hot new client. And if they read something they like, then they may grab you up.
Well, and that's for the people I know, the different people who listen to this are both kind of in the game and really trying to be in the game. But as someone who now, and I don't know why I keep isolating myself as saying I'm so old, but as someone who's been doing this for, 20 years. Oh, shit.
That's okay. I'm there with you.
Okay, good. It's I'm glad we can swear. It's those people are still in the business. Those assistants are still in the business. So if you're gonna, this is one of the things I always say, if you're gonna be like, don't be an asshole to anybody. If keep people in your life that are solid and good, because they will still be in this business, and you will work with them. You'll be shocked in 20 years. You will need them badly.
All right, I want to pause you there, and I want to pick that up in a minute. But Raamla, let's talk about your coming up. It seems like you sort of went through the assistant route.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, for sure. I went to grad school, so I'm actually from LA, which I'm one of those weirdos who are actually born and raised here.
You're surprisingly normal for that.
Yeah, you're so normal. But I didn't, have any connections necessarily. So I was like, well, I want to do this. I want to write. So I went to USC for writing program for 2 years. And then a year after I graduated, I had a friend who worked at private practice as a PA and heard about an opening at Grey's Anatomy. And he was like, send me your resume now, because
interesting.
Once a job like that opens up, they're getting like 10 or 15 resumes within
At least
2 hours.
Yeah.
And it's not from, monster.com or it's just from people who work there. So I sent my resume and I got the job. And that was season 6 of Grey's. And I was a huge Grey's Anatomy fan. I actually had to kind of downplay how much I loved Grey's Anatomy because I thought they might not hire me because that I might be a crazy person. But
I want to stop here and back you up for a minute. At USC, so you knew you wanted to write. Did you know you wanted to write TV?
I didn't. It's interesting because I graduated in 2008, and it was kind of at that time when people were starting to talk about showrunners and what TV people did. But I still was kind of into film. And it really wasn't until I started working at Grey's Anatomy that I was like, oh, wait, these people just like sit on these couches and then they talk about stories and then they laugh and then someone comes in and brings them lunch. I was like, no, this is what I want to do for sure.
I'm curious about the USC program, knowing that you wanted to write film, knowing that you wanted to write, drama, whatever, narrative. What was the course like? What did you take out of it, or what did you learn that you still use today?
I think, it's interesting because there's 2 things that I got out of it. The main thing being just having to write fast. Because I think a lot of times when you're writing on your own, at least for me, I had a full-time job and I was, busy or tired. And I used to live in New York and, be like, I want to go out. And, suddenly you've been working on a script for a year and, life goes by fast. But when I went to USC, it was like a semester. Like you had, 8 to 10 weeks and you had to from start to finish. Yeah. And I just think the fact that I did it was very helpful to me because I think until you do that process very fast, which is what you have to do if you're going to be a professional, and even faster than that. But once you do it, you're like, oh, wait, I don't have to spend, a year of my life on one script. Like I can do this faster. Yeah. And I think that was helpful. And also just the fact that I got my first job was from another colleague, who is everything. And if you're not either if you don't have a famous friend or, if you don't know anyone, I tell people, either try to, go through the agency, like in the mailroom, just start that way, or, go to school or go take extension classes or something just to meet people because that's so key. And that was what was key for me.
Growing your network in an organic way, especially.
Absolutely.
Not going out and chasing people down.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, with my peers and I completely agree. The people who are your peers who are assistants, those people a lot of my friends are, working writers or became development execs from my class, the ones that kept at it. So, I'm a big believer in the no asshole theory because I always say I like 95% of people and the other 5% of people I don't like are just like, and they stick out to me.
They stick out like a sore thumb.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you remember because you're like, you're not a good person. And you just remember that. And I remember it as when I was an assistant and, you remember it when you're producer level.
Well, that's an interesting thing. And this came up in the conversation I just had is like, people treat assistants different than they treat the people they're going to meet, the showrunner, whoever it is. And that says a lot about those people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm curious to hear about your assistant work, especially that first job. Did you even know what you were in for?
It's interesting because I had worked in so many jobs before that. Like I remember getting a letter when I was like 24 that I'd like like reached the limit of my social security like points or something, that I had so many jobs that I finally, like you can get yourself. I was like, wow, what is this?
Did you start when you were 5?
15. Yeah, I was like 15. I worked at the Gap, and then I worked at Fox Searchlight. I worked at LA Sparks. I was all over the place. So I knew what it was like to be an assistant. But I think, I had a master's degree. I was like 28 when I was getting coffee, PA. Yeah. I remember, having to put butter on a bagel. You're just like, you just have to take a deep breath, and you do have to check your ego and think about what is the mission? Like, what do you want at the end of this? And everyone was very kind and nice to me. Yeah. So it wasn't like I was working in some kind of hell, place. So everyone was nice, but that was the job. And I feel sometimes assistants coming up can be impatient and say, I've been here 6 months and nothing's happened. And you're like, really? Really 6 months? Or like even a year. And I knew the assistant before me had been the writer's PA for 2 years before he got promoted. So I was like, I'm just going to see what happens, and I'm going to work hard and work on my stuff. Yeah. Most importantly.
Well, and that's the next part of the question is like, how did you start to make inroads as a writer?
So this story I tell people because it's a warning of, so Jenna Bands, I became her assistant for Off the Map, and she was awesome. And she was like, I'm going to read assistant's material, if it's good, I'll staff an assistant. So I was like, yeah, right. She's not going to staff, in my head, because I didn't have anything. So to make myself feel better, I was like, there's no way she's staffing an assistant. And then she did. She staffed one of the assistants who's had a great sample, and he was a hustler, and, he got the job. And I remember going, did I really waste this opportunity to be staffed? And I mean, I was staffed. It took 2 years for me to get staffed after that. But I tell people, I say, I know it's hard to be an assistant and you're tired. And like you said, some people, you going out at 7 p.m. living the Hollywood life. But it's like you do. After that, I was at on the weekends working on my spec. I wrote a Mad Men spec. I wrote a Shameless spec, and I wrote a pilot. And it was like, I was like, never again. Never again am I going to be in this environment where people are willing to read my stuff and not have anything.
I think there's a lot more opportunity in this town than people consider. Yeah. Because it's so hard to break in. And so I think you're kind of like, oh, okay, so it's not going to happen. Because it's true. It is a crazy lottery. Like you have to really hit 6 super numbers to even like be able to get in the door. Yeah. But once you're in the area, there's a lot of opportunity. You just have to be that person. Like when I think, I'm sure all of us actually, there's a time when it's midnight and you're at work and you're exhausted and you're like, holy hell. And if you have someone there who's an assistant who is just there with you and has like, that you can rely on them and they're in the trenches with you, that person I can guarantee you is going to get some sort of reward.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And there's also, I mean, it seems like you learned this the hard way, but being ready for that opportunity, right? Having the material. And so it's like being physically ready, but also being emotionally ready. You told yourself that this wouldn't happen.
Exactly. And also I think too, like keeping going, because sometimes people miss out on opportunities and they go, well, it's not, if it didn't happen this one time, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. It's easy to be discouraged in this business.
Yeah. But it's like, if I just knew I had been through other jobs, and I was like, I don't think there's anything else I'm qualified to do. So I really hope this works out. So I just said, I'm just going to try it until, And, when I became a writer, when I was on Scandal, I was still the youngest person on the show at 31 or, whatever. So I think there are a lot of myths about, people say, oh, well, I'm already in my mid-30s and it's too late. It's like, no, we had a writer, Paul Davies, who came on Scandal as a staff writer, and he was, had been a lawyer the whole career, and, went on to create For the People and, so I think I tell people, I'm like, if you really know you want to do this, you have to be dedicated.
Well, and that's everything you're saying is the same mentality when you're sending the stupid fucking query letter to an agent.
Exactly.
After a year, you're like, this is humiliating. And yet I'm not stopping.
And and you didn't stop.
No.
Exactly.
Tenacity, it really, there's something to it in this business.
Yeah.
And so I just want to sort of skip ahead a little bit. Was it while you did the Disney ABC program?
Yeah,
right?
I did the Disney.
Was that while
ABC.
you were assistanting?
That was while I was an assistant. So Scandal, I got to Scandal and was a researcher on Scandal.
Oh, right.
And we found out we got 7 episodes. And this is in 2011. This is not now when everyone's very happy about 7 episodes. This was like, oh, okay, so this is going to be a 1-season show.
I didn't realize that was the first
order. So that was an order. And it was going to be like in April or something. It just felt like it wasn't going to last. And I was like, my job will be over in October. I need to do something. And the Disney fellowship, I think it was like in 3 weeks or something when it was due, and I just hustled. I was like, I talked to my old bosses to get Mark Wilding and Jenna Bands. I said, can you please write me some recommendations? And I had, at that time they required 2 specs and I only had 1.
And these require specs of existing shows. Most of the fellowships.
A lot of those fellowships. I think some of them now will accept like an original pilot and a spec, or there's usually like, I think you can write a pilot too, but I think initially you do need a spec. And so I wrote a Mad Men spec in 3 weeks. I mean, I was unemployed, but I was like, this is going to happen.
Banged it out. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did. And that was another thing. I was like, so I take, like I said, a year to write 1 script and then 3 weeks to write another. You surprise yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I did that. And then I got into the Disney program, the next year. And then came back to Scandal through the program.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that was kind of like I got in the program. I was like, so guys, I'm free.
Right.
They're like, oh, okay.
Which, we'll say the people who go through the fellowship are like free staff. The studio pays for them.
Yes, exactly. Right? So it was an incentive. It was like my cost to you is nothing. Yeah. So any value I can add was, again, I really believe you have to figure out, your kind of play and how you're gonna.
Absolutely. And did you get an agent through the fellowship?
No, I got an agent through one of the writers, Jenna, who liked my Shameless
so even before.
And passed it along to UTA.
Oh, that's great.
And they really liked it. And then I just kept sending UTA samples of things I've been writing. And they're like, you write a lot of stuff. And I said, I don't want any doubt that, that I'm committed to this.
Yeah, show them you can do it. Yeah. I mean, you often hear the story of the writer who has 1 script, right?
Yeah.
And it may be a great script, but that's not the job. That's not going to get you the work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, we'll pick up there. Holly, tell us about your breaking in. Where did you come from? How did you decide you want to start doing this for a living? Did you get tricked into it? What happened?
No, it was, I had an interesting path, I think, in that I grew up in Virginia, never thinking of California and LA as like somewhere that was just, on another planet. And I went to school and I worked as a social worker for several years, and some life changes happened and I moved out here to connect with family. And I'd always loved writing. Part of my job at working as a social worker was I would do custody home studies. And I remember, I feel like that was like my first experience of like my boss coming in and saying, okay, so the idea that a guy met you down at the end of the driveway with a shotgun, important to put in there. But the idea that the couch was a Ralph Lauren and it was red and had flowers, maybe not needed. And then I started going, okay, all right. But I like this. I enjoy writing. It was difficult, but there was just something I had always had through just growing up. I liked journaling and writing short stories, and had some teachers through high school, but college I was a psych major, and then I went on to get my master's while I was working as a social worker. And so cut to kind of an earlier midlife crisis than normal, moved to LA to reconnect with family, and landed a job through a connection on Dawson's Creek. And it was its second season. I know.
A writing job? What kind of a job?
No, it was I went in for the interview and was told I would be the writer's assistant.
Okay.
And when I walked in that morning, they sat me at the receptionist desk. And this was aging myself, but this was back when everybody who was a writer had their own phone in their office, and there literally was a production secretary, not just a production assistant. So I was like, well, oh, okay. I thought that I was gonna be the writer's assistant. But okay, all right, I'm gonna run with this. And I think Kevin Williamson, I remember, was driving in from his Outer Banks Entertainment, and I they were changing the phone systems, and the writers were all coming in their first day and getting set up. And I think I hung up on him like 4 times.
Oh my God.
And I thought, my career's over on my very first day. And they were really sweet. Paul Stupin, who was with the show, and it was the second season. And he was basically, just go down and hide in the copy room again. Copy room, but like hide in the copy room. Well, just don't worry about it. And so I came up on that show and got, eventually moved up to writer's assistant after that first season, and was writing my butt off. I'd have to be there at 8:30 in the morning, and I was living in Studio City, and it was in Santa Monica. So it was a big drive, and you got the idea of the traffic. So I was leaving at 5 a.m. so I could get there to just write for like an hour of quiet time before everybody started coming in the door. So, and I was taking a lot of classes at UCLA Extension because I was playing catch up because I wasn't, I didn't have that film school background. And I was also seeing, is this really what I want to do? So
there's something, let me stop you here for a sec. There's something about getting that writer's assistant job, and there's no preparation for that.
None.
Like, you were thrown into this, and that was a tough room too.
Very, very.
How did you even know what to do?
I just kind of wung it. I mean, you wing it. You just go, I'm going to check, like you were saying, you just check your ego at the door, because it was literally, but there were a lot of really cool people on that show that I got to like meet, and who were very kind, but there also was there were a lot of people that were cycling through. Like, I think we had a season where we went through 4 showrunners in a season. So it was a lot of like, just stay grounded. But there was a lot of positivity, and they gave me opportunities. Like, there was a little Dawson's Creek book series, and they're like, do you want to write a couple? Pitch us. And I got to write a couple, and then Dawson's Desktop was this huge big thing that came out where it was, fans could go on and look at like, what was Dawson's homework that, and well, he wrote a love letter to Joey, and it's in the trash bucket. And,
oh my God. I wish I knew about that.
Okay, but I'm just saying. And I will always feel very fortunate that I got my first spec script on the show off of kind of proving to them, yes, I have writing, and I wrote tons of specs, and they read them, and it went okay. It was one of those where I was like, maybe it came too soon, and I needed more time, and that was a hard lesson learned. But it was a good learning experience. In the minute that it was happening, I was like, oh, okay. So I wrote the spec, or I wrote an episode. They're not going to hire me for next season. Crap. What do you do? And that's where I think, because maybe it was because I wasn't right out of college, and I had already worked in a completely different industry, and I walked in and had to have the hard conversation with my boss to say, what's my role for next season on this show? And had to get the hard feedback, and went, okay, then I'm going to go. And they're like, you can stay. We love you. We will work. And I was like, I think I need to kind of just broaden my wings. And so then I went from show to show to show that got canceled, but learned a lot, got to sit in a lot of writers' rooms, got to see different ways that different writers, like Odyssey 5, Line of Fire. And then finally I moved up from writer's assistant to script coordinating. And I got a job on 24. And that was where I really got it. So it took 4 shows before I got onto a show that I felt very comfortable with my job. I'd been taking more classes and feeling more confident with my writing, and worked for them for 2 years, and got what I think I've heard people call the magical script that finally gets you through the door. And my husband and I had met my husband out here and gotten married, and we were writing together, and we wrote a spec I'm sorry, an original. And this guy who was Deputy Demetrius, I'll throw him a shout out. He was writing on the show, a lower level writer, and he wanted to read something of mine. And we were just become friends. And I said, well, here's, a sample Don and I just wrote. And he read it and he said, Howard Gordon and Joel Surnow and Bob Cochran, they were all developing and they were looking for their next project. And he was like, I think this is what they would, I think they'd love this. So he went in kind of as my champion to say,
that's great.
Read it. And so I remember that day Joel had the script printed out in his hand. And as he walked by my office, he said, nighttime reading tonight. And my heart dropped. And I remember driving in, couldn't sleep all night, drove in that next morning, and Bob's car and Joel's car were in the parking lot, which normally I was there first. And I had this like fantasy of thinking they're here to talk to me because they're so blown away by it that this is what they want to do. And they were.
Wow.
And I was like, it was a wonderful moment. It was the Cinderella moment
awesome.
where they pulled me into the office. They said, this is what we want to do. They had Howard on. He was somewhere else at the time, but they had him on speaker. They had all read the script over the night. They had talked about it and pulled me off the script coordinator's desk. And Don, who was working at AFI at the time, he came over and we worked with them to just polish it up, sold it to 20th Century.
That's wild.
And it went out and nobody bought it. And we were like, oh, okay, where do we go from here? And while it didn't, nothing happened with it, it was the sample that got us and kind of that, with them being behind it and
sure, legitimized it a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was a quality sample that people could look at and know what you're all about.
We got our first job on Smallville.
That's great.
Oh,
all right.
awesome.
I want to ask just to get a little detailed on the difference between writing that Dawson's episode, that freelance episode, and then writing this pilot. And having been in those rooms in between, what are things you picked up in those rooms? What do you think was different about the experience of writing the new script?
Well, that was an original.
Right.
So it was definitely coming from, and there were many more samples I had written after the Dawson's Creek freelance that I got. There was a lot of chaos that was going on the show, and there wasn't somebody that was really firmly running the ship when that freelance was written. So there were things that now, like for example, when I went on to Smallville, Don and I were a team. Al Goff and Miles Millar created the show. We're a team. They love to hire teams, but when we walked in the first day, we were like given this kind of list of rules a young staff writer should know when you are coming into the room.
What
the
was
do's
on
and
this
don'ts.
list?
Best list ever. It was like, go up check your ego at the door. As a staff writer in the room, it was a big room. It was like, I think we had like 12 people. And we would split up into smaller rooms a lot, but we would have a larger room from time to time. And it was basically, you were playing in the Allen Miles sandbox and try to stay within that sandbox and work within the parameters, as well as, going up the hill was a term used a lot, which is like, go up once. If your idea is rejected, don't sulk. Don't, keep invested. Go up again, but then let it go and know in your heart, either you're ahead of the game and it's eventually going to come back around, or you're behind and you'll eventually catch up. And so it was little things like that. Then they made fun of like, don't pass notes with your writing partner / husband. And I was like, that would never happen. But okay. And just kind of really feeling the vibe of the room and positivity. Don't fall asleep. I mean, I've been in rooms where people have fallen asleep.
That's good advice.
Yeah,
in general.
you would think, but
All this talk.
I could just stop there. I
No,
don't
but it's
know.
funny. It's all this talk about how hard it is to break in and all this stuff. And then people listening are like, who the fuck's falling asleep in a writer's room?
I'll tell you, it
Yeah.
can happen. It happens.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see it happen. You're like, oh.
Wait, it's happened to you as well?
I not to me. I would literally.
You've witnessed it.
die.
No, but
I've
you've
witnessed
seen.
it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
So this,
I know.
while we're on the subject of these rooms that you sort of came up in, Raamla, I want to come back to you and talk about your first year as a writer on Scandal, and like, you must have learned everything.
Yeah, I mean, but also it is so terrifying. Like thinking about season 2 versus season 7 is just, it's like I'm a different human. Like, and I think it's so hard because all you want, like for so long, all you want is to be like, I'm a writer, and then you get in that room and people are talking and you're like, what are you saying? What? Oh, where? Oh, and then you're like trying to think about your own idea. And then you realize like they've already moved on. And then you are like, okay, I'm going to pitch it. I'm gonna pitch something, and then someone else says what you've been thinking, and then you're like mad at yourself because you're like, wait, I had that idea. So then you're like, no, the next idea I'm gonna pitch, and then you pitch that, and then people are like, and then you're like, I'll never pitch again. So it's like literally just a cycle of self-hate. I think.
So how do you learn to sort of keep sane in that and navigate the room?
I realized that I needed to figure out what was going to be my contribution to the room. Like, what am I good at as a human to be good in this room? And the one thing is that I was like a genuine fan of the show, and like I think a lot of people write, you write on shows and you like the show, but you go home and whatever. But I was like, I was kind of like the prototypical Scandal audience, like black woman in her like mid-30s, like eating popcorn and wine. Like I remember one time I was just eating popcorn and wine and I was like, oh my God, like, I'm just doing this, like without, like not consciously.
A little on the nose.
Exactly, yeah. So I would just remember, like I would watch cuts and I would, make sure I read all the revisions coming out and I would just remember everything about the show. Like I'd be like, oh well, in episode 211 we did that, or and they'd be like, you're so weird, but at the same time they'd look to me to be like, did we do that? Or I covered set a lot, so when you cover set you tend to remember things more, and I could say, hey, like, oh, this actor was good, or I could give reports back about different feedback. And on Scandal we had a lot of media stuff that had to be written, even though it's kind of in the background of scenes. So I would just write them all, like without it. I would just be like, I'll write them. Yeah. I'll write them. And it was a great way to show my boss how I could write.
And both of you have mentioned this, that these opportunities come up, especially for assistants or young writers. Oh, yeah. And you say yes to them.
You say yes. And because sometimes if it's a 2-page scene, you have to write a 2-page scene to match. Yeah. And what in the background of the news thing. So
or writing audition sides.
Writing on sides, writing sides. Anything. Again, the ego thing. It's like, just don't think. Well, I don't. I'm above that. Like you're like, nope, I'll do it. Nope, I'll stay here. I'll be times it's like I would cancel things, but nope, I'll stay. I'll help.
And if you're above that, you won't get asked again.
Do you know what I'm
saying?
You won't.
Well, okay, she's not interested.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But also besides that, that's how I learned. I learned a lot. Shonda would come in, read a script and she'd come in and give notes, and, I'd take down the notes. And it took a long time because she really is just like so brilliant, where you're just, we'd spend a week trying to figure out something, and then she'd just come and be like, oh no, it's that, move that, and you're like, what? How did you figure that out? So, but I will say after, and I think this is true for everyone in the room, we had a pretty big room too, like, 12 or so people, 12, 13 at one point. But you just kind of, it just is time. And I think sometimes people don't want to be patient to just take the time and absorb it and be like, it's okay if, you're not, the best at whatever part this is. I always felt like I got stronger in the room. I was really strong in the room. And then there were certain types of scenes I could do well on the page. And there's certain types of scenes I just couldn't write, and that was fine. But I knew what my strengths were, and what my strengths were, I really tried to, push that as far as I can.
What were the types of scenes that you felt strong in?
Anything sassy, pretty much. Anything where someone is throwing some shade at someone, being mean. It's like, I don't know, like I'm a pretty nice person, but I think my inner wanna be mean girl that's not really there comes out.
Sure. It's a good way to get that out.
Yeah, I just like
Safe
gets
way.
it out. It's kind of like, I guess, like drama people, like they're funny, or like comedy people are kind of like sad. You know how that happens?
Yeah.
So just, again, I think you have to be honest with yourself as a writer, for sure, and be okay, with the weaknesses, and figure out how you're going to make those not weaknesses. Like my hero Beyonce, I'm wearing a Beyonce shirt.
Yeah.
Who just keeps getting better.
Despite all of her weaknesses.
Despite all her weaknesses.
Still haven't found one.
Every time you're like, this is the best she can do, you're wrong. And then you see Beychella and you're like, oh my God. That's what I
I think that's what we all aspire to.
Absolutely.
There's something, both of you brought up about coming up in these rooms, which is to sort of let go of ego and be willing to learn. James, I want to hear about selling Hit the Floor, but you didn't have this experience of coming up in rooms.
Right.
So what was your learning curve up to selling that show?
So this kind of goes back to keeping good people in your life. And so, I was on DC as a staff writer, and then I thought, okay, this is great. I've broken in. I'm just going to go from staff to staff to staff. It's finally happening. And that wasn't happening. It would come down to like me and someone else, and that other person just must have been like, just that much better. I don't know. But then I met a woman named Maggie Molina at a drinks party. She was friends with someone else that worked at Big Ticket Television. And I remember, just to date it for everybody, our debate was Britney versus Christina. And I'm pretty sure we're on the same side, and it wasn't much of a debate. But anyway, but it was just going out for a night of drinks, what have you. And then she's like, oh, you should come in and, you're right, you should come in and pitch, some things. And pretty immediately I had actually 2 movies. She at the time, she was head of original movies at MTV. And so almost immediately I had 2 movies with her set up, just because we just kind of grooved. We're very pop culture oriented. And so then I kind of got into the TV movie world. And eventually it became, but I was still taking staffing meetings. But it became very clear to me that I couldn't fake it. Like, I couldn't go to these meetings with shows and I read the script. And I'm not saying like, I shit ice cream. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, if I'm reading a script that I think is terrible, or I'm just not into it, it's a military drama, I could give 2 whatever's about a military drama, whatever. So I'd go to these meetings and I would do all the song and dance, and I would be like, oh, and I would have this one expression that I would say. I don't know if Holly has heard me say this, but and it was always my dead giveaway for I don't care, and I haven't invested in what you've written. And meanwhile, this is their passion project probably, and like I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but I would never know what to say about a show. Oh, it takes place in South Beach, and it's this, it's models and young kids, and there's guns. I don't care anyway. So I would say, oh, I can see the billboard. Like, oh, I can totally, I can see the billboard. And like, what kind of bullshit? Not like if
that's not even a compliment, technically.
If I had written a script and a writer was coming to me and I said, I could see the billboard, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. Like, what? I apologize to everyone I've ever said that to. But I ultimately came to the conclusion that not only and I'm sure that was why I was not getting staff. I mean, frankly, if someone comes in to Hit the Floor, like you said, you're a fan of Grey's Anatomy. I would love, if someone came in as like, I love Hit the Floor and here's the X, Y, and Z of it all. People love that. And it's not an ego thing. It's like, okay, that's so much shortcutting that we can do now. And you have the right energy for the show, and that's wonderful. And so I was not doing that with the meetings I was on. I'm sure they were picking it up. I'm sure I was a terrible actor. I'm sure they were like, go look at your own billboard, asshole. And so I pretty much determined that the only show that I'm really going to get staffed on that I will actually like is something that I write, which is selfish and welcome. And so I would do pilot after pilot after pilot and write and sell them. And it was great. And I was having my living. And
were these getting shot?
No.
Or were you just selling them?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
The movies were getting made.
Right.
But in terms of pilots, no. I mean, I would get these like great deals and whatever. And so, and my quote went up. as is common. You can make a great living and your quote just rises off of nothing. And so, but then Maggie Molina, fast forward like 12 years, and she and I had worked on a couple of things together and been great friends throughout the entire time. She said VH1 was looking for a show that was kind of a mix of, they had two hits at the time. One was Basketball Wives, which is still on the air, God bless them. And it was a reality show. And they had Single Ladies, which was scripted. And they're like, what if this peanut butter and this chocolate came together? So they wanted like a scripted show in the world of basketball, which if you're doing a scripted show that's a soap, you know, through the eyes of the female characters who, you know, so it just made sense that it was a dancers. And so I had kind of fashioned this pitch within just, I want to say it was like a couple weeks or maybe like what have you. And Maggie was in, maybe Atlanta. Jeff Old, who ran that department at VH1, got on the phone together because we couldn't be in the room. And I basically was like, okay, this is a show and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, sounds great. And hangs up. And I'm left on the line with Maggie. And I was like, did we just sell a show? And she's like, let me call you back. And then she calls back in 5 minutes. She's like, yep, we sold a show. So after all of like 15 years of just like trudge, I sold this is scoop to anyone who's listening. I sold Hit the Floor over the phone.
Wow.
And you're an overnight success after 15 years.
Exactly. And then yes. But the room is very different. I mean, Holly could maybe speak to this more than I could, but my room is very different than probably a lot of rooms because I don't have the war stories. I don't have the scars. I'm not jaded by seeing people rise above and I didn't have that experience where I was sitting next to someone going, I have this idea. And then they pitched it and maybe they heard me mutter and took my idea. Like there's a lot of drama that goes on, I've been told, in a room. But because I don't have that, I basically have a room that is very, I don't know if it's Pollyanna. I don't know if it's what, but I mean, the room's too small to have clicks, frankly. Who are you clicking with but yourself?
Right.
We don't have the 12 writers and sometimes 13. So it's a democracy. Anytime someone speaks, whether you're me or a staff writer, everybody else listens. Everyone is really supportive. And I mean, I feel like script assignments are really no drama. I feel like it's all very merit based and everyone is invested. So like I remember talking when I was meeting writers, to staff and I say, you know, I don't like conversations behind closed doors. If I see you bully someone at the table, it's going to be like, that just doesn't work here, blah, 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 blah. And this one woman who I was meeting to write, like cried in our writers meeting. And I was like, oh my God, like what is going on? And she was coming off of a show where the two showrunners were on opposite sides of the country, did not get along at all. It was constant feuding and she was in the middle and it was just a horror story. So she was like, what is this, you know, unicorn show that you're talking about where like, you know, and I keep bankers hours. I mean, everyone's pretty much gone by 6 and, you know, so
you want it to be a sane place for everyone.
Yes.
To work.
Now the other part of that is my first assistant that I ever had was through Hit the Floor when it was Bounce. And it was Sarah Fahey, and Sarah's one of our writers now. And she was from day one. Sarah's very much like Holly, where they've been through the machine and their experience for me has been incredible. Like, I'm so glad that you've been, Holly, through the trenches, because when someone, you know, it's not a utopia sometimes. And sometimes when someone has a hurt feeling because of how things normally work in a room and it didn't work that way here, sometimes someone can either come to me and say they may be feeling this or what have you. So I remember in the first season, they did the call sheet and they had someone else's name above mine. And Sarah's like, it was a different executive producer. And like, oh, you know, your name should be up top. And I was like, and I'm so like, I don't give a shit. She's like, no, your name is going up top because you're the showrunner. And it was something, but it's something that you just don't know if you don't anyway. Sure. So, I mean, Holly could probably tell you more about like what that means in the room. But for me, it was a big learning experience. But learning it, I feel like in a way that I always wanted to be I tried for like years to be in a writer's room and get beyond staff writer. I just couldn't do it. And so I always wanted to be there. And I was like, what would it be like to be an executive story editor and a co-producer I always wanted to know. And but basically once the show because I was so close with Maggie and had proven myself to Maggie, and also she's and I think she'd not mind me saying this, she's a ball buster and she's very network, and she was at VH1 at the time as an exec. And so she basically was, I'm sure behind closed doors, she was like, if this guy fucks up, I'm going to swing in and like put someone else there or take over. Like she's going to protect the turf in a great way.
But you had the working relationship anyway, and she knew that she could sort of work with
and
you.
I learned on the job. And I think that if I had stumbled, I think she was always there for support. I think if I had stumbled badly, she would have been there for a replacement or here's some help. But it never went that way. And I think if I was at an ABC or a network like that, I would never would have gotten the opportunity. And I'm grateful that VH1 was a place I could actually become who I am.
You can learn the ropes there. The pressure was off a little bit, even though you have to run this show.
Right. Well, when you say now, like we got 7 episodes, isn't that terrible? Our episode order is like 10, 12.
Right.
This season, now we're on BET, is 8. I'm fine with that. And that actually helped me. Of course. That helped me learn because we write everything in advance on Hit the Floor, and then we do production, and then we do post. Post is separated more by byproduct of the fact that I am on set all the time and I direct, so I can't really be in a whatever. Anyway, so it was a great way to learn.
Well, it's also, I mean, this show, it's not, explosions, but you have a lot of other action to deal with.
It's well, we have a really high degree of difficulty when you have, we essentially have 2 casts. You have, and each cast is large. It's not Castle, where I just have to wrangle the personalities of a couple of people and a few co-stars. I mean, I have, at one point we had 14 series regulars.
Yeah, and we serviced, they would, every episode, we would have a beginning, middle, end storyline for them.
For each and every one of them.
Yeah, we'd make it work.
Yeah. Wow. And then we had an entirely different, and then we had 11 additional dancers, and then we would give them stuff to say, during the season and have to juggle all that stuff. We had an arena as our standing set. We had all this basketball to do. So it was, and for a show on VH1 and now on BET, that's not really commonplace for what you see on there. No. So it's we go big.
Yeah. And it's a lot of moving parts, and it's a lot to keep track of. I want to ask very briefly, Raamla, about, because you were there for the entire run of Scandal, about bringing that show in for a landing. Oh,
well, I will say, I think we all felt, how to say, #grateful, #blessed. That we knew it was ending. I think that is such a great thing to know. Okay, this is the last season. What can we do? Oh, we can push this further. Oh, we can kill this character and not have to think about, what the repercussions of it will be next season. But I think it was difficult because, there are a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say disagreements, but different opinions about how to end the show. I was the kind of romance person, every third episode I'd be like, Shonda come in and I'd be like, so what's happening with Olivia and Fitz? And then she's like, oh my gosh, please stop. And so I think, and then other people wanted to know specifically Olivia or specifically, David and Abby. And so I think, which is good to have different writers invested in different kind of storylines. So it was, it was fun until I think about the last episode, when we were okay, we knew, I think we knew the end of the episode, but we were still we were building to how certain things were going to end, but there were still some things we didn't know. And then it's okay, well that's what's, just deciding, you know, and I think, Shonda was, in there and we kind of all going back and forth. And so, and I just remember after the table read, it went well, and, she gave her notes and she was like, okay, well, and then we just all kind of sat there in silence. Cause usually what would happen is we talk about the next episode, after that. And so it was just this, everyone kind of looking around and they're like, well, we did it. The end, okay.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was really weird. And so, and then a lot of us went to do the last shot, that was way in the middle of the night. But, a lot of people were there for that. And, but it was, what was great is that, we talk about these horror stories on different shows, but, Scandal was such a hit, in those middle seasons and, kind of toward the end, but that we were kind of waiting for the actors to turn. We were when are they going to turn on us and hate us? Or when are they going to start behaving crazy? And they never did. I mean, they genuinely loved each other. Like, and
You had a lovely group.
yeah, and they were all like very nice and professional.
And Josh Molina.
Yeah, Josh Molina, and so, and I mean, like, you know, I'd had actors come up to me and be like, "Can I change? Can I take that out?" And you're like, "Yes, it's fine." You know, so they really respected the word.
Yeah.
So I just didn't, you know, I didn't really have that experience.
Yeah.
Of that, which I'm, you know, very grateful for, but also in my next thing of still fearing, because I'm like, oh wait, I know it's coming. I know it's gonna come where someone's gonna be locked in their trailer.
Well, yeah, let me ask you about that. So you're under a deal now, and I assume
Yes.
you're developing shows
Yes.
for ABC.
Yes.
You know, there has to be part of you that wants to recreate the experiences which were positive that you
Yes.
had for 7 years.
Yeah, for sure.
How can you start to build that in, even from the script phase, right? Like, you have control
Yeah.
over the script. That's the
Right.
thing we have control over.
Right.
So how can you start to think ahead towards that? Or can
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm working on a script right now with Issa Rae, who you know does Insecure,
Best.
and she's so awesome and great. And I mean, I'd kind of known her a little bit before, so you know, I was happy to, you know, not only work with her because she's funny, but also like I'm very into not working with people who are crazy, or I'm like my mental state is so important.
That's a start.
Yeah, so like I mean, even if she was, if I had heard she was like crazy or difficult, I'd be like, sorry, I don't care but I just can't do it. So anyway, luckily that's not the case. But you know, I know when Shonda was doing Scandal, she did a lot of research on the different actors that she was casting. To find out, you know, other people had worked with and get some background in the same way that you would do if you hire writers. If you know someone, you know, on a show, you might call and find out. So I think you know, do the best kind of research you can about people. And then you never know. And then you just pray, I guess, that it works out. Because sometimes someone can be one way on one show and then they come in another
They're a guest star. I hear about certain actors, oh, they were a dream. It's because they're a guest star. But once they become a series regular, they can be like, oh, hi, here's my face.
Here's my real face.
Here's my real face.
No.
Yeah. So you don't know. That's what I'm saying. You just can,
Sure.
you can only do as much as you can.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think I do feel like we're moving now more in a time where that behavior isn't as tolerated, where people are losing their jobs because of their behavior. So I'm hoping that curbs people to not necessarily behave that way, even though they should really not behave that way anyway as humans. But I think maybe the threat of actual consequences. Yeah.
And you have to pay attention when it's happened to me where someone has been like, I'd be like, oh, so what do you think of that? You know, this particular actor, life's too short. And I learned my lesson because I was like, oh, you know, I really, that people aren't saying these things to you just to be like, hey, here's a funny text. So
right, exactly.
Yeah. But
exactly.
but when all those shows that you develop go, and they will, you have it's great that you have that attitude because you are the be all end all. And in terms of how people behave, in terms of what, I mean, you've seen on your show, like, you can put the boot down in many different ways. Zero, you know, that will not be allowed, whatever. And everybody else appreciates it.
Right.
Because you can go, you know what, I can tolerate that, so I'm just going to walk away. But what that person does to everyone else the minute you walk away, it's like basically leaving your children with like evil babysitter who's just beating the shit out of them constantly.
Right.
So and it creates a bad energy around you. So you have to really take the responsibility. And it sounds like working on a show of yours would be fabulous.
Oh yeah. I just think it's such an awesome job that we have. You know, like it's such an awesome job that like I said, I remember. Like I said, I walked in and I was like, you fools are just sitting here on couches.
Sleeping, apparently.
And hanging out and eating, all the two things I love to do. And it's like, I want this job. And so and again, like, I mean, and, you know, working on Scandal, sometimes we had some, you know, late nights. And during those times, especially 22 episodes, oh my gosh, it's too much sometimes.
Yeah.
But everyone was very like, you know, sometimes we get into crazy laughter. We had fun. But again, I agree. Life is too short. And it's like, why ruin this perfect thing we have where we all make a bunch of money and we get to work like, you know, normal hours for the most part and have lives and
don't take it for granted.
Yeah, don't take it for granted. And I just that's what I mean. Like, I'm not interested in if someone is poisoned, like, you're out. Like, I can't. You're not going to mess up our little fun time that we're all having.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. I want to ask very briefly, So the 4th season of Hit the Floor
Yes, sir.
is starts July
10th.
10th.
Ooh, that's
Right?
soon.
It's
10
very
p.m.
soon. 10 p.m.
So
10 p.m.
as of this release, it'll have been on for a couple weeks. People
Yes.
can catch up. You're on BET now. How many seasons was VH1?
3.
Okay, so this
3
is the
and a
first
summer
season on
special,
BET.
which has always been sort of lumped in with season 3. Yeah.
Sure. But this is the first season on BET.
Correct.
Was there a rethinking? Did you get new direction from a new network, or were they like, we love that, give it to us?
They said, we love that, give it to us. It was the only thing that BET said to me was, they were like, would you like to come over? And I was like, absolutely. We were never canceled, but we were sort of sitting around kind of waiting while there's so much stuff that goes on at networks and stuff that the fans and even the producers don't understand. And so we're just sort of kind of, okay, what's going on? What's happening? And then BET's like, we'd love to actually, because there were some other shows that were doing musical chairs at the time, like I think it was American Wife. Is that what it's called? The
Sure.
Kyle Richards show, American Woman.
Oh, American Woman.
That wasn't meant for Paramount. Neither was like, so the shows were sort of moving around, and so BET snagged us, and they said basically be Hit the Floor. You have a great fan base, and they were fans as well. And so they just said there was nothing, and we do things a little bit differently on the show than stuff that I personally have seen on BET. And so I was wondering how certain things would go over, and those are never conversations.
That's great.
Ever. And so, and they've been really fantastic to us. And you know, taking shows over, I think is tricky. And I think, fans are very vocal, and there may have been instances in the past where shows didn't make the jump as they would have preferred. And so I think there's always an amount of how is the show going to be? Because God bless our fans, they love the show. And having it be different is a tricky thing. And so I'm excited for them to see, and they will by the time this drops, as they say. That is the same show. We're missing a few people, but we have new energy in there, which is really fantastic.
That's great. Congrats. I want to wrap up by asking you all what you are watching on television these days. What's getting you excited or inspired? What are you talking about with your friends? You're ready to go.
No, I just was like, because I think of when people are like, what do you watch? I'm like, what do I watch? I just watched, my boyfriend and I watched The Staircase.
Yeah.
And that was a lot for me. And he just got me into Luther, which I'd never seen. I don't remember,
I've downloaded scripts to just read their
Really?
scripts. Yes.
Oh, it's so good.
Yes,
That's
it is
funny.
so amazing.
It's so good. But
yeah.
I like Game of Thrones. I watched The Americans, and I like Dear White People. I'm like, Handmaid's Tale. I watch a lot of TV. I'm definitely watching Hit the Floor, though. Yeah. I am.
Yes.
You were saying, we were talking about this.
Yeah,
before
so
we
I know,
started.
but I want to know, like, how do you write the dance sequences? Do you kind of just write dance sequence and then someone
Atlanta Burns.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so we make sure that the dance has something to do with story. So we don't just go insert dance here and it could be any sort of nonsense. If we know we have a rivalry, or if we know that we have some murder is going to be revealed, whatever it is.
Right.
So that is, we have a dance that makes that relevant. And then we have an amazing choreographer named Michael Rooney. And our dancers are like beasts. They're incredible. And so we work out kind of the vibe of the dance, what it looks like, what it feels like, the song, and then we get it all together that way. But so we give some direction, but we also let, the people who can actually choreograph do their thing. Yeah.
I totally just
And you
stole your
said
question.
you used to dance.
Oh yeah, I used to dance, and I really appreciate it because I've seen some Hit the Floor, and I really appreciate watching shows about dance. Where people can dance.
Yeah. These are real dancers.
It's real dancers.
Our actors that are dancers dance, and our ballers ball. Like, we don't have the luxury. We shoot 2 episodes in 13 days. We don't have the luxury of going, and now we're going to, I know. Oh, yeah. How's that? Does Shonda do that?
No, 2 episodes in 13 days.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And a lot on location.
And on location.
We've got a lot of scope to the show.
Yeah.
So it is. We
big
hustle.
show.
We got a good transpo department.
Yeah. No wonder you write. So you write and then you do production separately.
Everything, because you really have to be so judicious with what we know. The last scene before the first scene is even shot of a season.
Wow.
And so that allows us to go, this scene in episode 2, it really has no impact on the finale. So why is it here?
Right.
And so, and I think that's great for us because it allows the episodes to be super compact. story-wise, and everything feels relevant because it is. Anyway, not to die.
That's really
not
cool.
to die.
No, that's
die,
awesome.
Die,
Yeah,
what's the word?
Diverse,
Divert something.
Diverse. Diverge. Diverse. Just diverse.
That's a deep dive.
Anyway, sorry.
These are good TV answers. James, what are you watching?
So when people ask me questions about what you watch, I feel like I always have an immense, Holly knows this, I have an immense amount of guilt because I know I should be watching Game of Thrones. I've never seen it. I would, anytime it was like Mad Men
I'll
or
say
Breaking Bad.
No.
You don't watch either?
I don't watch anything with elves unless they're saving Christmas.
It's just
It's
incredible.
good.
I don't want
It's
to see
so-
magicians and
I
shit.
know, I agree with that, but then
He
I
said,
watched
I don't
it
wanna
and
see
I was
magicians
like,
and shit.
But there's
it's
so much soap.
amazing.
It's
I
great.
know.
So-
I know it's an incredible, or like Walking. I just don't. What I actually watch, I don't know if it's because I'm working so much on my own show and watching another scripted show is hard, or I just am the worst poison for this business, and all I watch is reality. So
We bond there.
yes. So
I
if
do
you're
hear this a lot from people who
Yeah.
are in production for a
Yeah.
lot of the
Oh,
year or just
interesting.
working so hard on their own show.
well, and
They
I
just wanna
bring
turn
reality
off.
over. Like this season, we have Erica Jane on from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, just because I was like, come over and play. So I can tell you every Real Housewife from every franchise. I can tell you
Amazing.
every butterfly that died in the finale of RuPaul. If there's some real rough reality show, although I do have made time for a British baking show.
It's the best.
Oh, that is
but
great.
the old,
British
you
baking.
The
know,
old
before
one.
before all the new
Yeah.
people came in and took a big crap in the blender. But
Yeah, that's good.
anyway,
Disagree. I
Oh.
was ready to hate the new hosts, the new judge. I think they're great.
here's the thing though. I will admit I haven't seen it, so when I say take a crap, I
It's
just mean
really
where's Mary
charming.
Berry.
They're really charming.
But I will say this: because I love the drama, I follow on Google and Twitter and all this stuff, all the post breakup and like
Yes.
what's Paul Hollywood saying about the two ladies and what's the two ladies have to say about like
love
anything
it.
that's messy, I watch that.
Oh, interesting. Oh wait, I forgot to add Power. I also watched. So now I have Hit the
Yes.
Floor because there's not a lot of things to watch in the summer. Now I have Power and Hit the Floor.
And I think
which
they both
feel like,
Power comes out soon, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and today. Oh, today.
Oh.
Hey everybody, watch Power.
You're all set. Holly, give me something good.
I am obsessed with Naked and Afraid.
Oh,
well, we're done here.
It's specifically Naked and Afraid XL, where it's like a group. Have you not heard of this?
I don't know XL.
Oh yeah, there's an XL version where it's a group, like they drop 3 groups at different places, and they all eventually like some groups will like implode and others work really well together, and then eventually they'll hook up or one will like go, and it just can they make it the 41 days or whatever it is.
Is this scripted or reality?
This is reality. These
Okay.
people are dropped
Thanks.
off.
I just wanted to point out that you're also a terrible person.
Yes, I am. That is
killing
like,
this business. Thanks for watching every other show. We're
I'll watch
killing
the
it.
shows.
You're
You guys,
carrying it.
yeah, you guys watch the reality.
I will say bravo. I watch a lot of The Housewives of James. That's where we like even daytime. Like that's where we initially
Yes.
bonded in our interview. My
Yeah.
interview with you is like I could talk the whole lineup of CBS daytime television
Oh my
soap.
God,
So
that's so
soap. But Game of Thrones, The Affair, I'm obsessed with.
Those are good soapy shows. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
All right. Despite all of this talk, people should check out Hit the Floor season 4 and watch for whatever Raamla does next. It's going to be great. Thank you all for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was so fun.
Thank you for listening to the Writers Panel. Tune in next Tuesday and every Tuesday for a brand new episode. And in the meantime, please subscribe and review the Writers Panel on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. And follow me on Twitter @BenBlacker, just like it sounds. And let me know who you want to have on the show. The Writers Panel is a co-production of the Forever Dog Podcast Network and the ATX Television Festival. You can listen to more Forever Dog podcasts at foreverdogpodcast.com and keep up with the ATX Fest throughout the year at atxfestival.com. Thank you, and see you next week. Well, you'll hear me next week. Thanks for subscribing.
Forever Dog.
This has been a Forever Dog production. Executive produced by Brett Boehm, Joe Cilio, and Alex Ramsey. For more original podcasts, please visit foreverdogpodcasts.com and subscribe to our shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Keep up with the latest Forever Dog news by following us on Twitter and Instagram @ForeverDogTeam and liking our page on Facebook.